What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court. I am Sean Murphy. Today, joined by one of my favorite creators on TikTok as well as Twitter, my guy, Peak Leggy Sports. Dude, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show. How's it going, man?
It's going great. We've talked for a long time, but this is the first time we've actually got to speak face to face or like camera to camera, I guess it would be. But
Yeah,
I'm excited
yeah.
for this. This is going to be fun.
Me too, man. We have some mutual. I actually went to college with a friend of yours, a
Hmm.
mutual friend of ours, actually. So super surreal that we had that connection, but also just coming across your content, just super detailed. Know a lot about hoops. You're a fellow basketball sicko, just like me, and I mean that in the most complimentary way
Oh,
possible.
I
Those are my
appreciate it.
favorite. Those are my favorite types of people. Are people that are just deep into hoops. I have to ask. I see Ben Wallace back there. What all jerseys do you got back there?
So these aren't all of them. I didn't put out my Isaiah Stewart from it's like a Wish website. So it was
Ooh,
really
there you
cheap.
okay, yep.
It was the one
Mhm.
with the red and the blue. But anyways, I got a Ben Wallace Youth XL from my childhood,
There you
a
go.
Billups from my childhood, got the K, the 75th anniversary, got an Ivy, and then the teal Durin. So those are all my
Ooh, there
favorite
you
ones. I had to
go.
pull those ones out.
Dude, you got a solid collection. I like it. So,
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
whenever I'm, like, getting to know and, like, talking to, like, people about the Pistons, I always like to start with, when did you start watching the Pistons? What year do you first remember
Mm.
Detroit basketball? Do you remember the moment you became a fan?
I just remember playing 2K with my
Okay,
buddies,
yep.
and the other one was when Brandon Knight was a rookie. I always wanted to get drafted by the Pistons, and I wanted him to not be on the team because I wanted to be the point guard of the future. But I found out when I was drafted, he was still on the team, and that made me so mad. But
Yep.
I mean, Greg Monroe's of the world were my idols growing up, and that's says a lot about the state of the Pistons
Mhm.
during my time watching.
Yep.
I wish I could say I watched in the early 2000s and the mid 2000s, but I wasn't lucky enough for that.
Yep.
So,
Yep. You see, I kinda hit the jackpot. My first basketball game ever was a preseason game at the Van Andel Arena in Grand Rapids. It was the Pistons against the Dallas Mavericks in 2004.
oh
It
man.
was the year after they won the championship. So I got to see Dirk Nowitzki, which was really cool, but, also obviously that team was still together. That year they still made a finals run. It was, just kind of a crazy season. But I mean, the thing that I think speaks a lot to like the prevalence of Detroit basketball is a lot of the fans that I meet, like people would think because of how the Pistons have been over the last 15 plus years that they don't have a strong fan base. But the amount of people that I know that are fierce and loyal fans, and the time they started was Greg Monroe, Brandon Knight, or even
Mhm.
the Reggie Jackson, Andre Drummond
Yeah.
like years, like the Contavious Caldwell Pope breakaway dunk. It was almost 10 years ago, and that still circulates Pistons Twitter so much. Like, if that doesn't speak to how dedicated of a fan base it has, in my opinion, like, I don't know what does, you know?
Yeah. I have a buddy who's a diehard Rodney Stuckey fan. Like
Oh,
100%
man.
diehard Rodney Stuckey
Oh,
fan.
your
And so,
buddy needs therapy. My
yeah.
gosh, that poor guy. I'm gonna start
Mhm.
praying for him.
Yeah, it is interesting how you're right though. A lot of people's favorite players are kind of those Detroit players who didn't seem to have the best careers outside of Detroit, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just because of the city and the way, like people respect guys who work hard and hustle. And, I think we've always been, we've never really been the same as other cities. Like I think even with a guy like Cade Cunningham, right? Like I think of like the first moment he got a standing ovation
Oh,
from the crowd was actually when he dove for a loose ball
yep.
at home in his first game. I remember being there and watching that, and he didn't do great offensively that night, but the moment he dove for that loose ball was the moment I think people knew that he was meant to be, like a Detroit Piston, but also just like a guy who can represent that city because Detroit's not for everybody.
Mm-mm. Yeah, it's maybe moving too far ahead right now talking about JB Bickerstaff. Like he's been talking about in that conference about how they're going to play basketball in a way people from Detroit are going to love. Like
Yep.
Detroit Piston fans are going to love it because it's kind of a throwback style of defense, and I'm excited for that. And you bringing that up made me think of that.
Yeah, 100%. I was actually So, on last week's episode when this came out, I actually had, my buddy Czar on, and we were talking a little
Hmm,
bit about that press conference, and he actually kinda compared the energy a little bit of a JB Bickerstaff to, like a Dan Campbell, and I don't wanna
hmm,
go too far on that because obviously there is a success that was earned there, and, these guys are just getting in the building, but, I definitely think when you look at just, like, the attributes and kinda, like, the things that you look for and kind of like a coach for a young team, for a struggling team. I think Biggerstaff, especially like as like a communicator, as just like his energy, he definitely reminds me like he has a lot of Dan Campbell-esque
yeah.
traits. There's only one Dan Campbell in the world, and especially in basketball, I don't know if we're going to see someone quite like that, but I definitely think that, I think the press conference was a refreshing view, not only just for, maybe myself, but other people in the Detroit basketball sphere, because even though he was in Cleveland, he might not necessarily have gotten quite that much of a close view of JB Bickerstaff. I mean, the crazy thing, this is his first coaching cycle where he was actually hired from the jump to be the head coach. Every other time he's been a coach, he came in with the interim tag.
Hmm. Yeah, the thing about JB as well is, like, he just makes you wanna run through a wall. Like,
Yep.
that's where the comparisons to Dan Campbell are, like, prominent.
Yep.
Uh, and that's something that I think our young players need because the last few coaches we've had have been a lot of, um, I don't know how to describe it, but, like, more just calm teachers that don't seem to be too intense, and I think JB is gonna bring that kind of intensity that's gonna get guys on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. And, I think the other thing as well is it speaks that, I think there was a lot of, there was a lot of talk during the Monty Williams press conference, which I mean, obviously at a press conference, you're doing a lot of talking, no duh. But what I really mean is, like Monty talked about being excited to be here. But like JB Bickerstaff, there was almost that action that you could point of when, when Trajan was like, he's been in free agent meetings with us and he hasn't even officially signed the contract yet. Like, to me, that kind of speaks volumes of who JB Bickerstaff is, just like how hungry like that's a guy that wants to coach and
Yeah.
be in the trenches as much as humanly possible. And I think the other thing as well is talking about building a positive environment. Like, I think people might scoff at that, but I think it's amazing how much play people can forget to have fun in the NBA when there is
Mhm.
so many stakes and there are so many consequences and when you're losing so many games. So, just having someone with that mindset, in my opinion, I think, if you're looking for ways to be optimistic or, the traits of a team that a team needs to turn around the type of disaster they just went through, I think those are the things, right?
Yeah, of course, and also I'm talking about wanting to tune in or fans are gonna wanna tune in February and March, and we haven't had that for quite a while, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
believe them because these players are gonna play hard all the way through the whole season.
Yeah, 100%. And, like, listen, that doesn't necessarily mean that that it will like translate to wins and losses
Yeah.
day one, and I think it's important to have, that realistic mindset and expectation going into the season. But on the other hand, I think as long as you can say by the end of the season, there is a definitive identity and you can point to
Mm,
what they're doing and say, well, all right, we're heading in the right direction. Like, that's a successful season. Whether that's 24 wins, 25 wins, 30 wins, I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but if we look at it and go, "Yeah, that's Detroit basketball," I think you would have smashed the first year out of the park.
yeah, and that gets me into kind of like a weird territory because I know a lot of people are kinda up in arms saying, "We're only gonna win 25 games, that's a loss," but I mean, that's almost double what we won last year. So it's
Yep.
like, you just need to see progress this year. Doesn't I really don't care about the win total. I really wanna fight for the play-in because it's fun to have that kind of, motivation to watch at the end of the year, but I mean,
Mhm.
as long as you see guys buying in and you see a system kind of you can see the plan going forward. That's all I'm looking for.
I think it's about having consequential hoops by the end of the
Mhm.
season, right? Like, that's something that they talked about in the press conference last season was, they want to have, they want to be playing in meaningful basketball come spring. Whereas last year they were knocked out in November for all intents and purposes, right? So, I think like the thing that you really want, not only as, like when you're in the perspective of a fan, but also just when you're an organization, is a reason to be excited as the season goes on. Even if they're 3, 4 games out of the play-in tournament, just like you said. And listen, I don't think that's entirely out of the realm of possibility when you look at both the bottom of the Eastern Conference and the amount of teams that are entering that race to tank, and also because that reason that teams are going to want to tank, the Cooper Flag class is coming up. And listen, for Detroit, they've proven 2 years in a row having the best odds might not necessarily be the best route for
Yeah.
them. So I think, Atlanta, they made the play-in tournament and got the number 1 overall pick. So you can still be in great position for, this really deep lottery
Oh,
while
yeah.
also pushing forward and trying to compete. I mean, the current lottery, in my opinion, just doesn't incentivize that level of tanking anymore.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And with this draft class coming up, I mean, I actually from last year's this current draft class, it's so weird because it just happened. But
Yep.
a lot of people were saying the number 1 pick was worth like what, the 8th pick in other drafts, the 5th
Yeah, it was
pick,
kinda like if
7th.
you were to just take the top 5 of your normal conventional draft, chop them off, and then you started at, like, I like, I think one of the podcasters I listened to said, it's like if you started at Isaiah Okoro as number 1.
Hmm.
It's like, oh,
Yeah,
man.
that's crazy to me. But like
Yeah.
we could still make the play-in and still get a really good dude because this draft is going to be really deep. And everyone says that every year the draft's going to be deep. We're not going to know until next offseason. But I mean, I'm pretty confident with Langdon's draft history.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, not only that, but the track record of the types of players that he's gotten, but also the things that he's been able to do with the people that he's brought in. Specifically, Fred Vinson, like,
Mm,
I know from the outside in just hearing, "Oh, the Pistons got a shooting coach," like, like big whoop, but Fred Vinson is like one of the like renowned as one of, if not the best shooting coach in the world. So the
yeah,
fact that he left a New Orleans situation, which by the way, he was there for 14 years. So
that's a long time.
he far preceded Trajan Lane. He was actually brought on to the New Orleans Pelicans to be an assistant coach for Monty Williams. That's how long ago he was brought to New Orleans. So I think it says a lot that he was willing to leave New Orleans to go to a Detroit situation to follow a Trajan Langdon. And it's early, but in my opinion, as the offseason's gone on, I think you can see why they followed him because
Yeah.
as far as the execution, the vision, the way that he goes about business, for a lack of better terms, the dude's just a pro.
Yeah. I mean, Dennis Lindsey came and he was a finalist for the position. Like that
Yep.
must yeah, that takes some guts to be able to go work for a guy that got the job over you. And I don't know how far he was in the process, but he left a good situation in Dallas.
Yep. Well, you know what's funny though? Like it's actually similar. So when Trajan Langdon, so he was with the New Orleans Pelicans before the Pistons. He actually interviewed for the president position back in 2019
Hmm.
alongside I believe their president over there is David Griffin, who was with the Cavaliers back in the day. When they hired him, they liked Trajan Langdon so much that they made a big offer for him to be their general manager. And now, 5 years later, Trajan Langdon interviews alongside Dennis Lindsey. They get Trajan Langdon. They like Dennis Lindsey so much. And listen, that's a guy who's also built some really good basketball teams. He was the
Yeah.
architect of the Utah Jazz team, who was first in the Western Conference just like under 5 years ago, which that's not a small feat in a really stacked Western Conference. And, by the way, multiple of those pieces now part of key contenders all around the league. So I think the fact that you have multiple guys who understand what it takes to not just bring in talent, but construct a roster. Because
Yeah.
I don't think people can dispute that Troy Weaver was a good eye of talent, but as far as executing a roster of putting players around that talent, though that's where he fell short, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, yeah, David Griffin, was originally the executive over in New Orleans, and he brought in Trajan Langdon, who also interviewed for the job. There was that parallel with the Dennis Lindsey situation, but I think the really important thing is just having that unity of the vision from the top down. I know people might be worried because one of the most common things we heard about this Pistons regime over the last couple of years was the too many cooks in the kitchen,
Yeah,
but
of course.
I don't think you can have enough good basketball minds in the room, but on the other hand, it has to be unified under one collective vision and one clear path. Because I think, when you look at how the Pistons have operated the last few years, it makes a lot of sense to hear that there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen because not every move necessarily felt like they had a common thread or common plan alongside them. Whereas,
Mhm.
albeit just a couple of weeks through the offseason, it's felt like every move that's been made has been intentional, has been
Yep.
plotted out, and feels like a plan that still even has some layers that it can be built upon it.
Yeah, I think the biggest theme that I like is moving towards the, spacing the floor for everyone, and I think
Yep.
that's been the unified goal of this front office so far. I was actually surprised because I thought he might dig more into defense and getting some more defenders. I don't know what Najee Marshall got, if he got an offer from Detroit, anything like that. So I'm a little bit surprised kind of with the Beasley signing. I know we need spacing, but I'm really happy it's just a unified vision of knowing, okay, put space out there. We'll figure some other stuff out later. Let's just give these young guys some help, and then
Yep.
hopefully they can grow from there. We can get defenders after that. So maybe that was their thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting. He actually I remember at the press conferences, I was pretty fascinated by his philosophy about like defense, like, just talking about, the importance of bringing guys who can space the floor and talking about defense is something that you command from everybody on the team, from like everybody on the court, that's something that, that you have to bring to the table. So I think, a lot of times we think, oh, you need to bring in, defenders, and it's like, what does that necessarily look like? Because not every defender comes in the same shapes and sizes, right? But
Yeah.
I think, like having that, expectation from the top down and having that going in when you're building that team, but also, I think when you are taking that approach of not necessarily, like thinking defense first when you're looking at, a prospect or a player, like I think that is where it is important to have a coach like a JB Bickerstaff who can
Mhm.
set that expectation and set that tone from the top down because that's something we've seen he definitely can do. I mean, in his time in Cleveland, I know people might have, can say whatever they want about how it ended, but, throughout his entire time there, they had a locker room that revered him, respected him, and that showed because they were one of the best defensive teams in basketball.
Yeah. Didn't he have an award? Didn't he make an award to give out, the dog award or something? You know what
Yep.
I'm talking about?
Yep. Mhm. Yep. Yeah, I don't remember what it was called, but I think it was something alongside that. I remember hearing about like Cleveland Cavaliers players talking about like, the biggest dog in the locker room
Yeah.
and things
So
like that.
what could be like the Pistons version of that? Like, I don't know if he wants to exactly take it because it's like copying, mimicking, whatever it is, but like, what is something that could get these guys hyped up in the locker room? I don't
Just
know.
just thinking off the top of my head, I mean, I think the advantage he has in that department is unlike Cleveland, there's actually some culture to go off of. You know what I mean? Like I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think of, well, what can we do fun in Cleveland? It's like, well, it's Cleveland. So you know what I mean? But whereas like with Detroit, like people are very familiar with the music scene. They're very,
Yeah.
very familiar with, just like with like the style and the fashion and the swagger, things like that. So it's funny you see like throughout baseball, there's like the different like home run
Oh,
celebrations,
yeah.
things like that. Football, I think celebrations are getting a lot more creative. It's only a matter of time until I think we start seeing more of like player like after the game, like players earning like a chain or something
Yeah.
like that. You know what I mean? Kind of like what you see in like college football after you get like an interception. That's like another thing as well. I think there's
Hmm.
a lot of different things that you can do, but I think that's going to be key this season is finding those things to get players rejuvenated, but also just locked in and invested in having fun because Again, they even said it during the press conference as well. Like you're willing to go and dive for those loose balls and make more of that concerted effort on the defensive side of the ball when you're enjoying where you're at, when you're having fun and wanting to be a part of what you're a part of, right? Like if
Yeah.
if everything's dull and everything just sucks all the time, instinctively you're going to shut down and shell in a little bit.
Yeah, and it starts from the top of making sure you're getting your players invested because ultimately that keeps the fans invested long term. I know
Mhm.
with 20 games left through the past few Piston seasons on Twitter, you see a lot of, okay, checking out. Oh, I missed this game, whatever, all that. I don't want to see a lot of that. I want to see some reasons for people to tune in for those kind of fun little things.
Yeah, and I think the biggest win of the offseason is that not only were they able to bring in multiple quality veterans who can play consistently, but they brought in guys who over the last 3 years all have played 70 plus games.
Yeah.
Like, even Paul Reed, who they just brought in from Philly, he played all 82 games last season.
Hmm.
Tim Hardaway Jr., who in my opinion is kind of similar to Tobias Harris, who I think the narrative's gone like too far the
Yeah.
other way. Like Tim Hardaway Jr. is not a scrub.
Yeah. 15 point per game score, like third option. I mean,
Yeah.
playoffs went the way they did. He was injured. I think people forget about that. But
Yep.
I love the durability that they added because I mean, we all kind of notice it with this core. Some are fluky injuries, but more than not, people are out. And so having those veterans that can play, so even if one of your young core dudes is out, at least you can still have a chance to get a win because you can put in those guys who have been through it, been through the fire. So
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And I also think the other piece of playing meaningful basketball, like in my opinion, you look at Cade Cunningham, like at the end of last year. Yes, he was dealing with some knee issues. In his last 3 games, he scored like high 30s.
mhm.
Like towards the end of the year, like it was pretty clear to me if there was a reason for Cade Cunningham to be on the court, he would have and probably could have been on the court.
Yeah, that's something I've been preaching online too, especially because posted something about Cade, and it's a lot of people are saying he doesn't play. It's like, well, there's not really a reason for him to these past years. Like year two, okay, yes, he had that surgery, but other than that, I mean, do you really want your star player playing all those minutes at the end of the year when you only have 14 games won so far? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Especially when they're in a position where, let's be honest, they really had to figure out who's actually going to be here this
Yeah.
upcoming season. And even though, like it's still only a couple of weeks in, like for all I know, I could release when this releases, I'll actually be up on vacation. But for all we know, the Pistons could be they could trade one of their key core players next week when this all comes out. People could be yelling at the screen like, Sean, what are you doing? But like as of right now, like it definitely it's apparent. I mean, and definitely in that time as well, it's like it's apparent that you can't bring a lot of that group back, right? And like
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear. I think we're maybe only going to have like a third of that group back, if that.
Yeah, there was a lot of fire for the Quentin Grimes trade for Tim Hardaway Jr. But
Which
like
I like Quentin Grimes as a prospect, but that was way overblown in my
it,
opinion.
it really was. It really was because he's shown some flashes, but it's been a couple of years since he's really had a major role. Like with the Knicks last year, he was injured for a bit of it, benched for a bit of it. Deuce McBride kind of took over, and right when Quentin Grimes was gone, Deuce McBride took a lot of that role that he
Yep.
had. He flourished. So, I mean, it sucks getting rid of a prospect, but when you have 5 or 6 other guys you need to really focus on with another draft class coming in, I mean, you need to get guys who you know can fit around them. And I mean, those 3 seconds are good too. That next year, second, is it the Raptors or Portland?
Yeah, it's Raptors. So it's pretty much going to
Yeah,
be like another like pretty much like a late first round pick for all
yeah.
intents and purposes.
In this class, that's going to be really worth it, especially for those teams and have so much money spent on high paid guys. Like they need those second round players who can play right
Yep.
away, especially those older prospects. And I could talk forever about how the early second round picks are going to be so valuable, but
Oh, yeah, no, like, with the way that we talk about it all the time here on the pod, like, I've been sounding the freaking horn ever since the new, collective bargaining agreement
mhm.
happened with the way the second apron and stuff works, like, I know it's a lot of mumbo jumbo and hearing about taxes and stuff, and it's boring to read, but when you look at the consequences of it, like, you look at a lot of the teams that are actually, towards the top, yes, we focus on their stars, but Boston is deep with guys who were drafted in the late first, early second round. The
Mhm.
Lakers, they're known for their star power, but they have the best development staff in the league. Like they have guys like Max Christie, who was a second round pick, who they just extended. Austin Reeves is a guy who was either a second round pick or undrafted, I believe. Like there's the best teams in basketball are utilizing and developing those players in those rounds, because that's where you really need to find the diamonds in the rough to actually have a deep team.
Yeah. So can I ask you, like, based off of that, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So what is your thought on how they should go about utilizing Ron Holland? So let's say we go into next year and roster is set like it is right now. So are
Mhm.
you sending him to the G League at all? I've heard some talk about that. Are you just having him on the bench to kind of soak it all in? What are you thinking?
Yeah, in my opinion, unless there's reason to, I don't think you send a number 5 overall pick down to the G League. I mean, he's had that experience already with the G League Ignite,
Yeah.
so I think he's pretty familiar with that league. Not that like if he needs more minutes, that's something that's always available as an option. But listen, I think for Ron Holland, like I think it would be a successful rookie season if he can have a consistent place in the rotation, coming off the bench like 15, 20 minutes a night and having an impact on both sides of the court in some fashion, right? Like
Yeah.
I think the greatest thing about what they did this offseason was that, unlike an Asar last season or Cade or Ivy or any of these players that we've drafted over the last few years, Ron Holland doesn't have the pressure to come in and be one of your first options day one. He's not coming in with the pressure, because remember, Sar Thompson came in, he was our best defender day one. He was guarding teams'
Yeah.
premier wing, like premier wing stars
And
day
he was doing
one.
good. I'll say that. He
Which,
those Jimmy Butler blocks early.
yeah, no, like for having to do that, he did phenomenal.
Yeah.
The problem is he had to do that at all. You know what I mean? Like the nice thing about having like a Tobias Harris is he's an adult in the room, right? Like
Mhm.
so I think I think he'll get like I think we'll see his role like obviously expand as the season
Yep.
goes on. But to me, I always went into this draft kind of looking at, if at least for this year you can get a player who can contribute every night in some fashion, I'd say that's a win. In that I think that's kind of where I was curious about, like, because talking about summer league, I think this is, even though this is obviously probably the least hyped up summer league over the years because of the draft class. I think for guys like Ron Holland, it's going to be
Yeah.
really interesting to be able to see what they're actually like as players. I'm curious from your perspective, because again, fellow basketball sicko here. I
Yeah.
watch as many hoops as I can possibly get, but I think the thing that's hard for people is, what do you actually take away from summer league, right?
Yeah.
There's there's a lot of action, a lot of different things that can happen, and it doesn't always necessarily translate to what we see come October, November.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious from your perspective, what do you look for like, what would you define as a successful Ron Holland summer league?
So I think a lot of people would think you'd want him to score 30, 40 points, all that kind of stuff. And that'd be really fun. I'm not going to lie. I would love to
Of
see
course.
that. But
Yep.
I want to see a guy who can fit into a system. I want to
Mhm.
see a guy who can show that he can hit an open shot.
Yep.
And just kind of showing that he can be a defender. We saw Asar Thompson do it the same thing last year, where he wasn't tasked to do too much offensively, even in summer league. He was that kind of glue guy, that first option defender. Um, Facilitator at points. And overall, it's just I want to see Ron go out there with a ton of energy
Yep.
and just kind of do the little things, because that's kind of all that matters to me in summer league. Because I think Jared Dudley said it really well, that you could be like, guys who will score 20 or 30 might not stay in the league, but a guy who scores 3 but does a lot of crap on the court, he'll have a long career.
Yeah, 100%. And, summer league, I don't think people realize, is really like not only a tryout for, like NBA roster spots, but even for G League spots,
Yeah.
for, teams
Hmm.
from Europe, come over to see players play. Like this is this really is a mecca of basketball for the next week plus, for all intents and purposes. I
I'm
think
excited.
I think the way I've described it before is, I don't look like you said, I don't look for necessarily the results. I look for attributes. I look for
Yeah.
traits. I look for, characteristics. Like I think I point at like a Cade Cunningham his first summer league, he didn't necessarily, especially the first couple of games, blow the league on fire with his statistics, but his leadership was apparent from the very first minute he was on the court. His command and his IQ was apparent from day one. Asar last year in summer league, his defensive prowess and his athletic gifts were apparent from day one. Jaden Ivey in summer league, he went out to kill.
Yeah,
He was
that
looking to
shot
kill.
making was insane.
Yep, yep, and like that motor was apparent from the rip. So just like you said, like if we get like a Ron Holland chase block or even just diving for loose balls, those high energy plays, like those are the things to me that will say he can come in day one and play, because those are the things that Ron Holland says like he's all about. So
Yeah.
let's see
And
it, you know?
and with Ron, it's crazy because he was number 1 on so many people's big boards, but then fell to 5. But a lot of people were saying he'd fall farther, even late into the lottery, which I thought was a little bit overblown. But when's the last time, other than Cade, the Pistons have got a guy who's been number 1 consistently on boards? I just can't think of that. I know it's a weaker
Yeah.
draft class, but that means a ton for this franchise, getting
Yeah,
a guy like that.
I mean, people underestimate the ability to, be able to land a guy who is a top high school level prospect. Really, the last time I can remember a guy like that kind of falling, it was a little bit more significant. It was like a Michael Porter Jr. with a lot of
Mm.
the back stuff that he dealt with. But, even just being able to come in and not have to be like when you can get like a number 1 high school level talent as a role player,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
kinda like hitting a jackpot, for lack of better terms. And I think another aspect as well that I think people might look at, and it'll go, like, under the radar. Um, Ron Holland's coming from a team that might have the only basketball team in the world that might have had a worse time than the Detroit Pistons this last year.
It
They
was
went
bad.
2-32.
Yeah, not a true
And
facilitator. A lot of guys who couldn't shoot great. You didn't have
right.
some true spacing for a lot of guys who need space to operate with Buzelis and Ron
Yep,
Holland, and
yep.
yeah, a lot of those dudes.
Well, and the other thing as well, the intention of the G League Ignite, it wasn't supposed to be just all young players. They had
Yeah,
mixed in, like especially at the beginning, the first year. I remember Jarrett Jack, Pistons assistant coach. He was actually a part of the first G League Ignite squad. He was teammates with Jalen Green and those guys because they brought in veterans to help those guys develop and grow. And so when you have Ron Holland as a number 1 option, having to go up against, people could say whatever people can say what they will about the G League. That is grown men who are
mhm,
professionals in the game of basketball. It is not an easy, thing to come into. So I think not only having that shared, like experience and pain, but also that shared drive to have things turn out differently. Like I think those are kind of like those circumstantial, kind of little things that I think can kind of make for like a perfect relationship. You know what I mean?
mhm. Yeah, that's. I'm just so excited about Ron Holland. I just can't stop thinking about just kind of the prospect we're getting, and I mean, you're right with G League as well. It wasn't meant to be for all those young guys.
Yeah.
Just looking back at that roster, I mean, there was a guy, Almansa, I can't remember his first name, but highly touted from last year playing in FIBA.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure he just moved to I can't remember if he went undrafted, but there was another guy on G League that ended up not staying in the draft, going back to college or something like that.
Yeah.
In a stacked draft class. So if you can't get drafted in a weaker draft class, I mean, it's going to be something for him next year.
Yeah, 100%. I think another player as well that I think will be interesting to, like get like a view of. We just talked about, the importance of those like second round picks. Bobby Clintman, who we got out of Australia, a guy who, when you look at the tape and you look at like what you're getting as far as like on paper, a 3-and-D wing who shot like, low 30s, high 40% in Australian basketball last year, was playing against professionals. I don't think I expect him to make any appearance on the roster this year, at least at the beginning, especially with the amount, which funny enough, we couldn't say this last year, but we have some wing depth now. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it's a granted that he'll play this season. If he does, I think it'll be March or April, but I think he's another guy where you just want to see what's the floor. What, like, what is he like as a player. And I think that is the thing that is, like that is fun about summer league nowadays. In the past, there used to be a lot of guys that you're familiar with. You saw them play in college. But now that we have players coming from all around the world, from
Mhm.
different avenues and taking different paths, that's one of the fun things about summer league now is you're literally learning who these players are in real
Yeah,
time.
and that's a really good point you bring up because Langdon, when he was with New Orleans, they had a good history of bringing in undrafted free agents. So, I mean,
Yep.
like, Jose Alvarado, Najee Marshall. So, is there a guy on this summer league squad that could potentially be one of those guys? And I'm not saying Langdon wasn't who discovered them and said, we need to sign this guy, but he was a part of the process. So,
Yep.
I'm curious to see, especially because Jenkins, point guard, high level scorer. I was watching some highlights earlier today. Smith, a big who can really dominate down low. I mean,
Yep.
and the track record with guys who usually go undrafted is you need to play defense. So I'm really going to watch the summer league and see some of the guys you might not be super familiar with and seeing if they can play defense, they might earn their way onto the Pistons G League squad, might earn their
Yep.
way to a two-way, see if they can move up. Because that's what I'm
Yep.
really excited for with summer league.
Yeah, I think we're also gonna have a pretty indicative answer of what the future of Marcus Sasser in Detroit looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, just like how much of a role he'll be able to have this next year. I remember last year in summer league, he kind of was on and off. One night he struggled and I think didn't make a shot. The next night, I think he went for 40 points.
Yeah.
So, like I definitely think when you look at potential breakout players for summer league, on paper, there's a lot of reasons to think that Marcus Sasser can come out and drop 30 plus points. But I think more than anybody on the roster, I think this is him justifying his place in Detroit going forward because, especially from the sounds of it from the press conference, it sounds like the Pistons are going to want to have a Cade or an Ivy on the court as much as humanly possible. So he's really going to have to show that he can be that third guard and can be that facilitator for those very limited
Yeah.
minutes that there won't be Caden Ivey. Which, by
Yeah.
the
And I
way,
think,
what a nice thing to actually be able to say that's gonna happen, right? To know that a player actually knows what staggering minutes means,
yep.
that's gonna be
I'm
good.
excited for that. Yeah. And with Sasser, I'm just excited for the summer league. I don't really care too much about the scoring, but I just want to see how he's been able to process this past season and go over film and just think about it this offseason and how he can become a better facilitator, playmaker.
Yep,
Because a lot of what JB was saying, it sounded almost like Jaden Ivey will be off ball and catch in motion for a
yep,
lot of his plays. So with Marcus Sasser, if he can show that he can facilitate, if he can show that he's grown in that level, I mean, could he be the backup one, Jaden Ivey to backup two? I mean, there's so many, like you said, there's a lot of different players that can play. So
yep,
it's about finding that combination. If Marcus Sasser can make a really good impression, I mean, I think he has a good shot, especially with his defense. He could
yep.
be like a favorite of JB.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, at Houston, he was more of an off-ball guard, specifically, like when he was looking to score, right? Like, I think,
Yeah.
especially you could kind of tell that he wasn't fully comfortable with running an NBA offense. And granted, he was part of one of the worst second units in basketball, and at points, one of the worst second units in the history of basketball. So I think having guys like Fontecchio, guys like,
Hmm.
like Hardaway Jr., even guys like Harris, to, help space the floor will help a guy like him a lot as well. But like you said, I think it's going to be important to see how much have you grown
Yeah.
as a facilitator? How much have you grown as a natural floor leader? Like, can you organize an offense? Can you run, like some solid pick and roll actions? Can you get players in position, for easy buckets? And how can you do in the fast break? Right. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I'd love to see him play a lot with Ivy this year because
yep,
they're both not, I don't want to say like point guards, but they're
yep.
not like the prototypical pass first point guard. So if you kind of put those two together, I think you could really put something there.
Oh yeah, 100%. Going into kind of the rest of the league for a minute, just kind of a quick aside. I know the other big story in summer league for the first time is a 55th overall pick in Bronny James. I know a lot of people have
Yeah.
been sharing clips and things like that. I personally think, and obviously I know it's been a little bit more highlighted in Detroit, like just kind of seeing the nepotism that you see kind of throughout the league and front offices and ownership and, and coaching staffs and things like that. So I think maybe some of the stuff with Bronny's a little too blown out of
Mhm.
proportion. What are your kind of thoughts about that whole conversation? And, do you expect to see any Bronny on the court this year at all for the Lakers from your perspective?
That's a loaded question because
It
with
is.
Bronny, I've tried to kind of stay away from a lot of that because it can get pretty toxic pretty quick.
Yep.
Um, I don't know what his long-term goal is in the league, but I think he can be a serviceable backup point guard. I'll say
Yep.
that. I don't think year one he's going to play a lot. He'll play a lot in the G League. Maybe if there's an injury, he gets called up. But I do think he's a guy that goes out there and can kind of do a little bit of everything.
Yep.
Um, with the scoring, he has to be a little bit more efficient to actually have a role in an NBA offense. But I think G League, he could actually be really good.
Yeah.
Um, that's like the lowest floor. And I think that's still pretty dang good. And I know it's so hard to be compared to a parent. I mean, Michael Jordan had kids that tried, John Stockton. I mean, you see it all the time, Scottie Pippen. So I think I think if it was any other player, he wouldn't be getting this much hate.
100%.
So that's a tough one to go by. I do think the talks about his agent telling other teams not to draft him made me kind of feel a little bit uneasy about it because
Yeah.
I mean that's a bigger opportunity potentially, but I don't know. What do
Yeah.
you kind of think about it?
Yeah. I think I think both things can be true, right? I think you can acknowledge that, nepotism was in play and that LeBron, had some form of influence of his son being drafted. But
Yeah,
I think you can also acknowledge that there are reasons from an athletic standpoint, from everything that he has, prototypically, there are reasons to say, okay, he deserves to have some form of evaluation in the draft, right? Especially the 55th overall pick in a draft class that is as hard to really grade as any in
yeah,
years. The odds of the Lakers missing the best player in the draft at 55 are slim to none, right? So I think when you look at the historical significance, what LeBron has done not only for the Lakers but just for the NBA, I think it's one of those things where in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal.
yeah,
Now, personally, and this is just me, this is just Sean speaking as what I would have liked to have seen just selfishly. I would have liked to have seen Bronny at least give one more year in college and really
yeah.
see how much he could have expanded his game and what he really is as a player. I think the stuff he went through with the cardiac arrest situation
Scary
was,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah, it's scary stuff, and it's a lot to, have to come back and play competitive basketball in Division 1 right off the bat. And I think consequentially, it's also a lot to then immediately jump into the draft, right? So,
hmm,
you know, it would have been interesting. Like, let's say he gave it a year at Ohio State, right? Like go to the college that his dad said he wish he could have played for. He would have earned a ton of money in NIL. Would have been the face of March Madness if he made the tournament, right? And probably would have had a pretty good chance to start if he went, right? So that I would have liked to have seen him be a starting point guard in college and have that opportunity to showcase what he can do and see what he actually is as a player. But
yeah,
nonetheless, I think when you look at, to your point, I think like when you listen to Bronny, I think he's pretty realistic about who he is as a player. He talks about like guys that he looks up to being like Derek White, Drew Holiday, Davion Mitchell. You know what I mean? Like he's not like trying to be like a superstar. He's not trying to go out there and be the number one guy, superstar, prototypical type player. So all that to say, I'm with you. I don't think that the level of hate and scrutiny is really deserved. If the name James wasn't on the back of the jersey, it wouldn't be there. But I mean, if we're being honest, if the name James wasn't on the back of the jersey, all the stuff he went through over the last year, he wouldn't be there either.
yeah,
So I think it's okay to acknowledge that, but also want to see him succeed still because he is still at the root. He's a kid, and it's a
hmm,
kid who achieved his dream. And if you're wishing for
mm,
an 18 or 19 plus year old to fail in this world, especially at something that they love, I just think you got to reevaluate some things. You know what I mean? Like that,
yeah, yeah.
philosophically speaking.
There was a good LeBron quote where he said, Bronny didn't have to, he had his life set. He didn't have to do anything else. But he worked hard enough to get to this point where teams were interested, where teams brought him out for workouts, where he made college. He got to do all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that does show that there has been dedication. It's not like it was just handed to him. And I think a lot of people might overblow that as well. Because, I mean, he did have to try. Everybody who goes through it has to try. The other side of it, and a little bit different swerve from it, but I mean, the NBA is a business, and it's a marketability for anybody. I mean, he was on the summer league graphics next to Alex R. So, I mean, whoever would have gotten him would have gotten a lot of money from ticket selling and all jerseys, all that kind of stuff. So,
I mean, he even though he was the 55th pick, I believe he was the player that was that had the highest bets for going number one. And I think he's also been the player who's been highest betted to be rookie of the year. And listen, I'm just going to spoil something here. People are going to lose those bets. You know what I mean? Like, I think to your point, it says a lot that he's willing to come in and he's going to be on what they call that stay ready team, where he's playing with those deep end of the rotation, you know, kind of like G League players in the gym, in those like practice scrimmages during the game, like during the day when people aren't watching, right? Like that's going to be a lot of Bronny James's action this year, and a lot in the G League as well. But I mean, also, like you said, it is a business. And when anytime you can give one of the greatest players in the history of the sport the opportunity to play with his son, I think it's one of those things where, you know, the Lakers are a historical franchise. I think they understand some things are bigger than championships. And I think this is one of them, you know?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Like it was a big moment in baseball when Ken Griffey Sr. and Jr. got to play together. Now, they say Ken Griffey Sr. and Jr. because, you know, Bronny ain't going to be Ken Griffey Jr., right? But nonetheless, it is just one of those things where I think we'll be able to look back, and no matter what Bronny's career will look like, it'll be like, man, how cool is that?
Yeah. 30 years, the people who hate on it will be like, oh, why did I do that? You know, there was no reason for that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a lot of things, you know, just kind of in the basketball world. Like, I think the biggest thing, like, there's been a lot of, you know, like, especially I think the player that's been the most unfairly treated maybe by NBA Twitter over the last few years is actually now a Detroit Piston again, Tobias Harris. He's someone that just in the Philly market was just killed. Especially, it felt like the turning point because he was, you know, he faced scrutiny ever since he got there, which, listen, any player who plays in Philadelphia does, right?
Yeah.
But the game when Jimmy Butler came out in the court, he was like, you guys picked Tobias Harris over me? Like that, from that moment on, it just felt like it was, it felt like it was never the same. And, you know, you just look at the way he was treated by, you know, by the Philly fan base there, you know, it was just getting absolute torched and killed. And listen, a lot of these situations, like, not necessarily Tobias Harris's fault that he got a max contract in Philly. Blame the guy who printed the contract, who gave the offer, right? But at the same time, just because it doesn't necessarily meet that like level of expectation doesn't mean he's not a good basketball player. And especially for Detroit situation, for what they're paying him for and for the role that he's slotting into, Tobias Harris is a good NBA player and is going to make a massive impact right away.
Yeah, and to a 14-win team, he adds
Oh
5,
my
6,
God.
7, 8 wins by himself. I mean, just think of the times we could have used a guy who could go and get his own bucket. When we just looked at Cade and said, okay, Cade, go do it. And then he doesn't do it. And people are like, well, why couldn't he do it? Well, it's because the whole focus is on Cade. I mean, oh, Jaden Ivey, go get that bucket. Oh, that guy's so bad. He didn't get that bucket. Well, I mean, everyone's collapsed. So you need a guy who's a veteran that's been through this, that can actually get those buckets. I mean, I'm just very, very excited. Huge Tobias Harris fan. I was a senior in high school when we got him the first time. So that was amazing. And I was bummed to get rid of him, but we got some good years of Blake. But yeah, the hate, not warranted.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the cool part about the return of Tobias Harris was when Tobias first came to Detroit, he was traded. Like he was acquired from Orlando. But this time around, even after, the historic losing, the hazing that the Pistons face as well. Tobias Harris chose to come back to Detroit,
Yeah.
and that's not nothing.
Mm-mm.
So, yeah, man, it's gonna be a fascinating season, a fascinating summer. I guess my one last question to you is, do you think that, because even though a lot of the free agency moves, I would say I would say 80% of free agency is probably, like planned and done at this point. I still think you're going to, probably still see some movement and mobility before the season begins. The Pistons still have anywhere from like 14 to 19 million dollars of cap
Yeah.
space to play with. Do you think the roster that we have today is the one that we see on the court opening night? Do you see the Pistons making a trade? Like, I know Isaiah Stewart has been floated around in trade rumors quite a bit. Jalen Duren is someone who's starting to creep in trade rumors a little bit more. Do you think the Pistons make another move before the season starts? What are your thoughts?
My gut says no, but getting Paul Reed isn't nothing. I love Paul
Yeah.
Reed, B-ball Paul. I mean, he's another undersized forward center. I mean, I would say he's more of a center than anything. And I know Isaiah Stewart has been shopped for since Trajan's been around. So,
Yep.
I mean, that would be my most likely trade. I don't think we get rid of Duran. He's Cade's pick and roll partner. If we don't have him, I mean, Asar, Ron are the only true oop threats. Maybe Ivy. I don't know.
The only way
I
to
had
me they trade a they the only way to me they trade a Jalen Duren is if they get a big that they like for the long term. Like, I don't think Mitchell Robinson makes sense at all just from his durability,
mm,
from his youth, things like that. Like, unless you're getting your first round pick back from New York, I just don't think there's value for that, right? I don't think like you're gonna see like the Pistons move on from a Jalen Duren unless they get a big back that they really like. Like, so like the name that I was kind of thinking of is, if there's another big that I could see Detroit want or liking or wanting to bring in, the other the other young big that's available in the league is Walker Kessler. And personally,
mm,
I think that's that question of, do you take the bet on Jalen Duren's upside and what he can be going forward, or do you go for that floor that a Walker Kessler has right now? I personally probably think it's not that much of a significant jump. I think on paper, Kessler would be probably a better fit day one than a Jalen Duren, but I think those would really be the only ways I'd see moving on for him. Whereas a now that you bring in a Paul Reed, as you said, not to be speculative, but it makes the inner wind horse go,
yeah.
you know what I mean? It just makes you go, "What's going on in Detroit?" Because
Yeah.
that even for Troy Weaver, that's quite a few bigs.
Yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen in that center position, but if I had my way, if it was the end of the offseason and Trajan Lane called me up and said, "What do you wanna do?" I would give all the rest of the money to Tyus Jones on a one-year deal. I mean,
Okay, yep.
I am huge on having another veteran facilitator, and I know people might say, "Well, what does that mean for Ivy? What does that mean for Sasser?" I mean, I think you make it work. You get talent, you figure out the fit as time goes on, and the
Yep.
only thing that does is it gives you another asset to move, or if anything, it's positive PR for saying, Tyus, we're going to give you this money. Come here for 1 year. You can hit the market again next year. And if everything goes well and if it works out well, I mean, he can be a starter. He can be a bench player. He can play with Cade, play with everyone. But
Yep.
that would be my ideal thing. But I know a lot of people aren't huge fans of something like that. But
He Tyus Jones is a high quality point guard. Like, when you
mhm,
talk about the non all-star, just high level starting point guards, like, I think Tyus Jones is right up there. Has the
yeah,
chance to be right up there, you know? So I think he certainly makes a lot of sense. A guy who has experience with young teams as well. Be kind of similar, not quite the same ceiling, but it would almost kind of be like if they were to brought in a Jalen Brunson a couple
mm,
years ago, which I was a big proponent of at the time. Yep.
mhm,
But, like, I think to your point, those are the types of swings I think you kinda have to make, and, like, some of, like, the fit stuff, you just kinda figure out later. But, yeah, no, I think, I don't know as far as, like, actual free agents who would be someone that they could bring in, but with that cap space Detroit has, I wouldn't be surprised if there was at least one more move made to try and acquire some more assets and to, just use that salary as the tool for that, because it just, even though we've been able to do that to a certain extent, I think as we get closer to the season, I think you'll see teams that will be less like more hesitant about what they have. But also, as you see the early months go on, if Detroit, hangs pat and keeps some of that cap space, you're going to have teams that are going to be urgent and want to make changes and blow it up
Yeah.
and be in position for that 2025 draft. So keeping that flexibility and having that patience that Trajan Langdon's had, I think that's like big value as well.
Yeah, and with the roster kind of, I don't want to say set, but as seemingly set as it could be, if we went into the season, we'd be fine. I wouldn't mind taking on a salary of a player who's not really playable right now, and I'd rather just get high quality picks back. I mean, beginning of the offseason, I would have not wanted that because that is what we did with Joe Harris. So last year. So I just want to see a nice, sweet, juicy first round pick in Langdon's pocket.
Yeah, 100%. Especially now that it looks like there's an NBA level team that's going to be on the court, right?
First time in a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Too
It is
long.
a bar. It is a low bar to reach, but I think it's a one that Pistons fans will be excited to be met and exceeded going forward. But Pete, my guy, seriously, thanks so much for coming on the pod. Really appreciate you being here. Where can people find your stuff, man?
Twitter, TikTok, at Leggy Sports. I tweet a lot more than I TikTok at this point in my life. So,
I feel that. TikTok's great. It takes a lot of energy. You have to be very dedicated and you have to be really good at it, which you are, by the way. You make great
thanks. I
stuff whenever
appreciate
you
it.
are able to. But, Twitter, it's just so much easier to be able to just hop right in the moment in the conversation as it's happening. And also just there's so much more people to bounce stuff off with and have that discourse as well. So always
building those relationships has been really cool.
Yeah, 100%, man. And this has been one here as well that I've just appreciated. And yeah, man, we'll have to run it back and have you on the season again, but have you on again before the season starts. It'd be fun.
Oh, I'd love it.
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much for listening and tuning into this episode. If you like the video, be sure you like it down low and subscribe to the channel to not miss any more of the content we have going on. Jeff and Troy will be back next week. They're both out on vacation, but that's going to do it. Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.